Hi everybody, welcome back. In today's mini lecture, we are going to be talking about communication apprehension. Communication apprehension, of course, is the academic terminology for speech anxiety or nerves, and it's one of the things that people in public speaking and communication have been studying the longest. Also, there's a nice little biological, physiological, anatomical component to it as well, so there's a lot of research around it. So as you've seen in the module, there are three different kind of reactions to communication apprehension, or that stem from communication apprehension or speech anxiety. I don't like to think about them as reactions, though. I like to think about them as phases that you move through, move into and move out of at different times, in different contexts, in different settings, but they still have the same kind of key factors, key identifying factors and key effects. So what we'll do is I'm going to use the board and just give you a little graph. If you're not a graph or a numbers person, don't panic. I'm not either. But I think that this helps kind of visualize the process of what communication apprehension looks like. And I find that it's really useful for identifying those different phases or different reactions in myself, but also in other people. So again, just really simply, say we've got just this very simple graph here. That is going to be our communication apprehension graph. And our first reaction or our first phase is the anticipation phase. So the anticipation phase, again, is that reaction or that phase where we initially get assigned the project, the speech, the presentation, the interview, whatever it might be, and we have that immediate sense of stress or anxiety. So it's kind of a low-level response, but it's a noticeable response, and so that's the anticipation reaction. So this little low level, we'll just abbreviate, we'll call it our ANT response because it's a little response. The second reaction, second phase or second response, this is the confrontation response. So the confrontation response is when we have that really strong reaction. It's when our name is called, when it's our turn to present. It's when we have to stand up and go and do the thing and present our ideas and talk in front of the group or talk on Zoom or whatever it might be. So the confrontation response is a much, much stronger response than our anticipation response. The confrontation response, for all intents and purposes, is a fight or flight or freeze response, also commonly referred to as an FFF response. If you're watching this in a Canvas module, there's a video directly below this mini lecture that details that in more detail. So the confrontation response is a large spike in our stress and our anxiety. Our body in this response, in this phase, thinks that we are going to have to run or fight for our life, or sometimes what happens is our nervous system just shuts down. So one of those three responses tends to happen when we are in a very high stress situation. I often think about it like my body doesn't understand that I'm just getting up to give a presentation. My body thinks that a bear just walked into the room and I have to figure out how to get the heck out of here. So the confrontation response, that's our fight, flight, or freeze response. And then our third reaction, or third phase, third response, I'm using them synonymously here, is the adaptation phase. Now the adaptation phase is a decrease in our stress response, but as you can see, we're still at an elevated level of stress or anxiety from our baseline. So say this is just our most relaxed. So our adaptation phase is still an elevated level of stress, but it's a manageable amount of stress. And so the idea of the adaptation phase is that we're still stressed, we're still in a high stress situation, but we're managing that stress. And that's actually a good thing. So stress in and of itself is not necessarily or inherently a bad thing. It can be a good thing. And we actually have quite a bit of research that shows that we perform our best both cognitively as well as physically, when we are at an elevated level of stress, but we're managing that stress. So the adaptation phase is where we want to be. Now, getting to this phase, typically in my experience, happens naturally. When I think about students and when I'm in the classroom and I'm teaching public speaking or debate, one of the things that I see is that students have this anticipation phase. Typically, we walk into class on the day we're doing speeches. I write everybody's names on the board. Students see their name on the board. That initiates a little bit of an anticipation response. Then when it's their turn, they walk up in front of the class and have this noticeable spike in their stress and their anxiety. That's a confrontation response. And then at about 2 to 2.5 minutes into a speech, they start to kind of relax a little bit and find a rhythm. And I think if you kind of take that lens and this perspective, you could probably watch some student speech examples online, or if you're in a class, keep an eye out for that, or even for yourself. I know for me, I notice this. When I'm nervous, I walk into class, the anticipation phase. Then we have the confrontation. Usually at the start of class, it only takes a few minutes for me to kind of work through this. But hopefully, I've reached this adaptation phase before I come to class. And the way that I do that is I actually do a lot of breathing exercises and a lot of breath work. So the two primary things that I do, one is called box breathing. So box breathing is a form of breathing where you think about you have an invisible box in front of you, okay? And then you use that box to guide your breathing. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, and you hold for 4 seconds, and that completes the box. So you can do box breathing. It's controlled, timed breathing. You can do this for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I like to do it in my car before class, on my first class of the day, especially the first few weeks of a new semester. I'll do some box breathing just to really kind of regulate my nervous system and try to get to this adaptation phase where I'm still stressed, but I'm focused, I'm locked in, I've kind of got myself into that flow state before I go into class. And so that's one of the things that I do. Another breathing exercise that is really helpful, and there's a lot of research that supports, is called diaphragmatic breathing. So diaphragmatic breathing requires that you really purposefully think about how you breathe in and how you breathe out. So a lot of the times, say you go to the doctor for a checkup, okay, and they ask you to take a deep breath, you breathe out into your chest, which is great, right? That's certainly not a bad thing at all. What diaphragmatic breathing asks us to do is to breathe down. So instead of breathing out, we breathe down. We pull the air down into our abdomen. And what this does, so the diaphragm is a little muscle across the middle of our abdomen that impacts our ability to breathe. So when we breathe down, that puts excess pressure on our internal organs in our abdomen. And that little bit of pressure causes a nervous system response that relaxes us. Our blood pressure goes down, our heart rate decreases, and all of that really stems from just putting a little bit of pressure on our organs. It's also the same thing that happens if you've ever laid under a weighted blanket, or somebody gives you a hug. You know, you're having a bad day and somebody gives you just a really solid hug. They're functionally squeezing your organs, and that's what's helping you to relax. So there's a number of things you can do. You got box breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. You can get a really good hug from somebody you're comfortable with. But in terms of communication apprehension, these are the 3 phases that we tend to see, or 3 reactions. And if you pay attention to it and you're kind of purposeful about it, you might be able to get to this adaptation phase purposefully and before you start your presentation. Of course, this is just a very limited mini lecture on this. There's a wealth of information about it. There's also, again, if you're watching this on Canvas, it's on the video below. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and good luck managing your communication apprehension.